The snow fell silent over Lima, Ohio. November snow, the kind that muffles sound and softens the edges of abandoned things. Colonel James Harrington stood alone in the center of what used to be America's beating heart of armored warfare, the Lima Army tank plant, and watched his breath turn to fog in the cold morning air. 35 years, that's how long he'd worn the uniform. That's how long he'd carried the weight. The factory floor stretched empty before him, a cathedral of steel and memory. Ghost machines lined the walls where 500 M1 Abrams tanks used to roll off the line every year. Now only 12 workers remained. 12 men, most over 50, walking through the motions of a plant that Washington had marked for closure. The cutting torch in the far corner sparked and died, its rhythm like a failing heartbeat. James was 58 years old. His back hurt when it rained. His knees cracked when he climbed stairs. The doctor said his blood pressure was too high, said he needed to slow down, said retirement was not just coming, but overdue. In 6 months, they would hand him a folded flag, shake his hand, and send him home to a house that hadn't felt like home in a decade. But this morning, standing in the cold silence, James wasn't thinking about retirement. He was thinking about fire, about sand, about a voice on the radio that went silent 28 years ago. The memory came uninvited the way it always did. Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom's bloody predecessor. February 1991. He was 25 years old then, young enough to believe in clean victories and righteous wars. He commanded a platoon of M1 Abrams tanks, 4 steel beasts rolling across the Iraqi desert under a sky that never seemed to end. 73 Easting, that's what they called it. The largest tank battle since World War II. 100 American tanks against 300 Iraqi T-72s and BMPs. The kind of battle that makes careers, that gets written about in war college textbooks, that turns young officers into legends. James closed his eyes and he was there again. The sand in his teeth, the diesel smoke, the radio chatter frantic and alive. His tank commander station, the elevated throne from which he directed death at 3,000 meters. His platoon, spread in a wedge formation, pushing east toward an enemy that outnumbered them 3-1. Lieutenant Richard Chen commanded the lead tank. Ricky, 25 years old, Chinese-American, born in San Francisco, graduated West Point with honors. He loved jazz music and bad action movies. He could quote every line from Die Hard. He had a younger sister, Sarah, who sent him care packages filled with homemade cookies that tasted like cardboard, but somehow made everyone feel closer to home. Ricky was James's best friend, his brother in everything but blood. The Iraqi T-72s appeared through the sand like ghosts materializing, thermal signatures blooming white-hot on the targeting screen. James gave the order: advance, engage, destroy. The words came easy because they had to, because hesitation in tank warfare meant death, because command meant making decisions in seconds and that you'd question for lifetimes. Ricky's tanks surged forward. The lead, always the lead. That's what good tank commanders did. They went first. The Iraqi round came from the flank. A lucky shot, or maybe unlucky, depending on which side of the equation you stood on. The projectile struck Ricky's tank at the turret ring, the vulnerable joint where metal met metal, where even the best armor showed its seams. The explosion was instantaneous. White phosphorus in burning propellant. Smoke the color of death. James heard Ricky's voice over the radio. Just one word, one syllable that stretched across 28 years. Jim. Not a scream, not a plea, just his name. Then static. Then silence that rang louder than any explosion. James made the decision in 3 seconds. Keep advancing. The mission was larger than one tank, larger than one man, larger than friendship or brotherhood or love. 73 other tanks depended on momentum. Hundreds of men depended on the advance continuing. War was mathematics, and the equation was brutal but clear. They rolled past Ricky's burning tank. They completed the mission. They won the battle. James was decorated. They pinned a bronze star on his chest and called him a hero. They never asked about the voice that said his name. They never asked about the 3 seconds. 15 minutes later, when the shooting stopped, James returned to Ricky's position. The tank was still burning. Inside, Lieutenant Richard Chen had stopped screaming a long time ago. The sound of footsteps on concrete pulled James back to the present. Heavy boots, the kind worn by men who'd spent lifetimes in factories and motor pools. Bobby Kowalski emerged from the shadows of the plant, moving with the careful gait of a man whose knees had given up arguing with gravity years ago. Sergeant Major Robert Kowalski, 56 years old, 32 years in the Army. He'd been James's gunner at 73 Easting. He'd been there when Ricky died. He'd been there for every deployment since, through Bosnia and Iraq and Afghanistan. Bobby's wife, Eleanor, had died 6 months ago from COVID, the virus that proved tanks and training couldn't protect against everything. Now Bobby lived alone in a duplex in Toledo, working at Lima plant because going home meant silence too heavy to bear. "Jimmy," Bobby said. He was the only person left who still called him that. "Phone for you." "Pentagon." James turned. Bobby's face was weathered like ancient stone, lines carved by decades of sun and sand and loss. His eyes, though, still carried that peculiar brightness of men who'd seen the worst and somehow decided to keep looking. "They finally sending the closure order?" James asked. "Don't know, but it's General Harris. Doesn't call unless it's important. Lieutenant General Marcus Harris, 3 stars. Commander of Tank Automotive and Armaments Command. A political creature who'd spent more time in Washington boardrooms than desert battlefields, but who somehow maintained enough credibility that the warfighters still respected him. He and James went back to the academy, though they'd traveled very different paths to their current ranks. James walked to the small office that served as his command post. The desk was military surplus, dented and scarred. The computer was 5 years old. The coffee maker was older than some of the privates he'd trained. He picked up the phone. "Harrington." "Colonel?" Harris's voice carried the crisp efficiency of a man who'd learned to conduct 3 conversations simultaneously while appearing fully engaged in each. "I have an assignment for you, your last one before retirement." James sat down. Through the office window, he could see Bobby pretending not to watch while obviously watching. "I'm listening, sir." "India is sending us a tank, the Arjun main battle tank Mark I. They want an honest assessment, 90 days. You run the evaluation, write a comprehensive report, submit it to my office. Then you're done. Full retirement with honors, clean exit." James was quiet for a moment, processing. The Arjun. He'd read about it in defense journals. India's troubled domestic tank program. 40 years in development, billions of rupees spent. A machine that was supposed to make India self-sufficient in armored warfare, but instead became a symbol of ambitious failure. Reports indicated 93 identified deficiencies. Chronic overheating, accuracy problems, a fire control system that malfunctioned in temperatures above 42 degrees Celsius. "Sir, why me? And why would India want us to evaluate a platform they know is flawed?" Harris paused. In that pause, James heard politics and calculations spinning through the general's mind. "Because you don't lie, Harrington. Everyone knows that. You'll write exactly what you see. No sugarcoating, no diplomatic dancing. India knows this. They're not looking for praise. They're looking for the truth so they can fix it or bury it and move on. As for why you, it's simple. You're the best tank officer I know who doesn't have a career left to protect. You can be honest because you've got nothing to lose." "Nothing to lose." The words hung in the air like smoke. "When does the tank arrive?" James asked. "Already en route. Should be at Aberdeen Proving Ground in 3 days. You'll have full access to Lima plant resources for 90 days. Assemble whatever team you need from the remaining personnel. Full operational authority. Just give me the truth at the end. And if the truth is that it's unsalvageable, then we write that. India knows the risks. This is about transparency, not validation." James looked out the window again. Bobby was smoking, even though he'd promised his late wife he'd quit. The smoke rose in thin streams, dissipating into nothing. "I'll do it, sir." "Good. One more thing, Harrington. There's a civilian coming with the tank. Dr. Arjun Krishnan, chief engineer on the Arjun project. He specifically requested to be present for the evaluation. Apparently he's got skin in the game." "Understood. 90 days, Colonel. Make them count." The line went dead. James sat in silence, holding the receiver until the dial tone turned to that annoying beeping that telephones make when you've forgotten to hang up. Finally, he placed it back in the cradle and walked outside. Bobby looked at him expectantly. "We've got to work," James said. "Real work. 90 days of it." "The plant closing?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever if we do this right." He told Bobby about the Arjun, about the evaluation, about the 90 days. As he spoke, he watched something shift in Bobby's face. Not quite hope, but something in that neighborhood. Purpose, maybe. The thing that had been missing since Eleanor's funeral. An Indian tank, Bobby said. You're telling me our last mission is to evaluate a foreign tank that everyone knows is broken? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Bobby took a long drag on his cigarette, thinking. Then he smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes, but suggests that the eyes might remember how, eventually. Well, hell, Jimmy, I've done stupider things in my life, most of them with you. Over the next 2 days, James assembled his team. It wasn't hard. There were only 12 men left at Lima plant, and most of them jumped at the chance to do something, anything, that felt like real work instead of waiting for the inevitable closure notice. Master Sergeant Frank Delgado, 53 years old, Mexican-American, the best combat mechanic James had ever known. Frank had done 3 tours in Iraq. His oldest son, Marcus, died there in 2007, IED attack outside Ramadi. Frank never talked about it, but everyone knew. You could see it in the way he worked, the furious focus that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied with anything except memory. Frank had sad eyes and strong hands. He could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. He could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. And he worked at Lima plant not because he needed the money, but because working with tanks was the only thing that made sense anymore. The only thing that connected him to his son, who'd also been a mechanic, who'd also believed that keeping machines running meant keeping soldiers alive. There were others, specialists and technicians, good men, quiet men, the kind who showed up on time and did their jobs without complaint. But it was Bobby and Frank who formed the core. 3 old soldiers, their combined age over 160 years, their combined deployment stretching across 4 decades of American warfare. They gathered in the break room on the second evening. James had printed out the technical specifications for the Arjun, 320 pages. Bobby whistled when he saw the thickness of the report. That's a lot of paper to say a tank doesn't work, he observed. James distributed copies. They read in silence. The only sound the occasional turn of pages and the hum of the ancient vending machine in the corner that only dispensed Diet Coke, regardless of which button you pressed. Frank spoke first, his voice carrying the slight accent that 30 years in America hadn't quite erased. Colonel, this says the Arjun has 93 identified deficiencies. 93. I've worked on vehicles that rolled off assembly lines with 93 deficiencies total over their entire service life. Keep reading, James said. They read. The deficiencies were brutal. Engine overheating after 30 minutes of operation. Main gun accuracy deviation of 4.5 meters at 1,500 meters, compared to the M1 Abrams' deviation of less than half a meter. Fire control system failures. Transmission problems. Weight issues. The tank was supposed to weigh 58.5 tons, but actually weighed closer to 62, putting additional strain on already struggling components. But buried in the report, on page 207, was something else. Test results for the Kanshin composite armor, indigenously developed. A sandwich of specialized alloys and ceramics, classified in composition. The test results showed survivability against armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds equivalent to those used by American M1 Abrams tanks. The armor worked. In a tank that failed at almost everything else, the armor worked. Bobby saw it too. Huh, would you look at that? Frank leaned back in his chair. So we've got a tank that can't shoot straight, can't move fast, and overheats faster than a Ford Pinto. But if you do manage to hit it, it'll probably survive. That about sums it up, James said. So what's the play, Colonel? We spend 90 days writing a very expensive obituary. James didn't answer it immediately. He was looking at another section of the report, the personnel file that General Harris had included. Dr. Arjun Krishnan, 48 years old, Chief Engineer, Defense Research and Development Organization, PhD in Mechanical Engineering from IIT Madras, 26 years working on the Arjun project. And at the bottom, a note, personal information, relevant to evaluation context. Dr. Krishnan's son, Captain Vikram Krishnan, Indian Army Armored Corps, killed in action during India-China border tensions, 2017. Vehicle, Arjun main battle tank prototype. Cause of death, mechanical failure leading to onboard fire. Captain Krishnan was 25 years old. James read the passage 3 times. 25 years old, tank commander, killed by the machine his father built. He thought about Ricky Chen, 25 years old, tank commander, killed while James watched. Bobby noticed James's expression. What is it? James slid the page across the table. Bobby read it, then Frank read it. The room fell quiet. "Jesus," Bobby said softly. Frank put the paper down carefully as if it might break. "The man designed a tank that killed his own son. And now he's coming here," James said, "to watch us tear it apart and document every failure." They sat in silence. Outside, the Ohio winter pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the plant, a heating pipe clanked and groaned. Bobby finally spoke. "What would you do, Jimmy, if you were him? If everything you'd built, everything you'd worked for, killed your kid? Would you want to know the truth, or would you want to believe it wasn't your fault?" James thought about 3 seconds in the Iraqi desert. 3 seconds when he chose mission over man. 3 seconds he'd replayed 10,000 times, wondering if there was any other way. Knowing there wasn't, hating himself anyway. "I'd want the truth," James said, "even if it destroyed me. Maybe especially if it destroyed me." Frank nodded slowly. "Then we give him the truth." 3 days later, the truck arrived. A massive commercial hauler carrying a shipping container large enough to hold a battle tank. It rolled through the gates of Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where the Army tested everything from bullets to bombs to the future of warfare itself. James, Bobby, and Frank had driven down from Ohio. They stood in the cold morning, watching as the crane lifted the container and workers began the careful process of unloading. The Arjun emerged slowly. Even covered in shipping materials and protective coatings, it was an impressive machine. 60 tons of steel and composite armor, longer than most American tanks, wider, riding on 7 road wheels per side instead of the Abrams' 6. The turret was angular, aggressive, mounted with a rifled 120mm main gun that looked capable of terrible violence if only it could hit what it aimed at. As the tank settled onto the ground, a man approached, short, thin, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a heavy coat against the Maryland winter. He carried a small wooden box, held carefully against his chest like something precious or fragile or both. "Colonel Harrington?" The accent was Indian, educated, tinged with British inflection from a school system that still remembered the empire. "Dr. Krishnan?" They shook hands. The doctor's grip was firm, but his hand was cold, as if he'd been standing outside for hours. "Thank you for agreeing to conduct this evaluation," Dr. Krishnan said. "I know it is an unusual request. Doctor, before we begin, I need to tell you something. I read your file. I know about your son. I'm sorry." Arjun Krishnan's face didn't change expression, but something shifted behind his eyes, a wall maybe, or a door closing. "Yes, Vikram. He was my oldest tank commander. Very proud, very dedicated. Doctor, I commanded tanks in Desert Storm. I lost men. I know what it costs." Krishnan looked at James for a long moment, measuring something. Then he held up the wooden box. "This is Vikram's ashes. Part of them. I scattered some at home, but I brought some here, to America. I don't know why. Maybe because I thought if you were going to judge the machine that killed him, he should be present for the verdict." The words hung in the cold air. Bobby and Frank stood silent, respectful, the way soldiers stand at funerals. "I did not come to defend the Arjun," Krishnan continued. "I came to learn the truth. For 26 years, I have worked on this project. For 26 years, I believed I was building something important, something that would protect Indian soldiers, protect my son. But it killed him instead. So now I need to know. I need to understand. Was everything I did worthless? Or was there something worth saving?" James felt something in his chest, a familiar weight settling in, the weight of responsibility, of judgment, of other people's grief seeking resolution. "Doctor, I can't promise you what the answer will be, but I can promise you the truth." "That is all I ask, Colonel." They moved the Arjun into the testing facility. The hangar was massive, designed to house multiple vehicles simultaneously. The tank sat under harsh fluorescent lights that revealed every imperfection, every weld line, every indication that this was a machine built by committee over decades, with changing specifications and political interference. James walked around it slowly, taking in details. Bobby and Frank did the same, their experienced eyes cataloging, assessing, already forming opinions. "She's a big girl," Bobby observed. "Bigger than an Abrams." "Heavier too," Frank said. "You can see it in the suspension. She's carrying weight she wasn't designed for." Dr. Krishnan followed them, saying nothing, just watching as these American soldiers examined his life's work with the clinical detachment of surgeons studying a dying patient. That evening, James sat alone in the temporary office Aberdeen had provided. The technical manuals for the Arjun were stacked on the desk. 320 pages of specifications, 250 pages of test results, another 170 pages of known deficiencies and attempted solutions. He'd been reading for 4 hours. His eyes hurt. His back hurt. The coffee had gone cold twice. His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he hadn't heard from in 5 years. "Dad, heard you're working on some Indian tank project, still doing everything except talking to your family. Some things never change." Michael, his son, 32 years old, lieutenant colonel currently commanding a mechanized infantry company somewhere in Afghanistan. Michael looked like his mother. He had her dark hair, her sharp cheekbones, her way of looking at you that made you feel simultaneously seen and judged. James and Michael hadn't spoken since the divorce. That was 10 years ago. James's ex-wife, Patricia, remarried 3 years later. She lived in Virginia now. She was happy. Everyone was happy except the people who'd been left in the wreckage. Michael joined the Army right after the divorce. James always wondered if it was to follow in his footsteps or to understand why his father had chosen the uniform over the family. Either way, the result was the same. They served in the same army, but lived in different worlds. James stared at the text for a long time. Finally, he typed a response. "Working, like always. How's Afghanistan?" 3 dots appeared, indicating Michael was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again, then disappeared. Finally, nothing. The conversation, such as it was over. James put the phone down and went back to the manuals. At midnight, there was a knock on the door. Dr. Krishnan stood outside, also holding a stack of papers, also looking exhausted. "Colonel, I saw your light. I hoped we might talk." "Come in." Krishnan entered, moving with the careful steps of a man navigating unfamiliar territory. He sat in the chair across from James's desk. "I cannot sleep," he said. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Vikram. I see the fire. I was not there when he died. They told me it was quick, but I don't believe them. Fire is never quick." James poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot he'd brewed an hour ago. It was terrible coffee, burnt and bitter, but it was hot and it was available. "Doctor, can I ask you something? Why the Arjun? Why spend 26 years on a project that everyone knew was troubled?" Krishnan wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, seeking warmth. "Because India needed it to work. After independence, after partition, we were a poor country. We bought weapons from Russia, from France, from anyone who would sell. We were dependent, vulnerable. The Arjun was supposed to change that, supposed to prove we could build our own future. But I think maybe we were too proud, too stubborn. We should have asked for help earlier, should have admitted what we didn't know. By the time we realized how far behind we were, too much money was spent, too much prestige was invested. So we kept going, kept trying, kept failing." "And your son?" "Vikram believed in the Arjun, believed in me. He volunteered to be a test crew member, said someone needed to trust Indian engineering. And who better than an engineer's son? I told him no. I begged him to refuse. But he was young and proud, and he trusted his father." Krishnan's voice cracked slightly. "That trust killed him." James set down his coffee cup. He looked at this man across the desk, this stranger from another country, another culture, another life, and saw himself reflected back. "Doctor, I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone except the 2 men who were there." And then James told him about Ricky Chen, about the 3 seconds, about the voice on the radio, about 28 years of guilt and night sweats and therapy that never quite worked, about being decorated for a decision that felt like murder. Krishnan listened without interrupting. When James finished, the silence stretched between them, heavy with shared grief. "Do you think you made the wrong choice?" Krishnan finally asked. "Every day. But you completed the mission. You saved the other tanks." "Yes. So perhaps you made the right choice for the wrong reasons, or the wrong choice for the right reasons. War does not give us clean answers, does it, Colonel?" "No, it doesn't." Krishnan stood up, holding his coffee cup. "Tomorrow you will begin testing. You will find many failures. The Arjun is flawed. I know this. But I need to ask you something. When you find these failures, when you document them, I need you to tell me something else. I need you to tell me if there is anything worth saving. Not for India, not for politics, but for Vikram, for Ricky, for all the sons who trusted their fathers and died anyway. Is there anything in that machine worth the cost?" James stood as well. I don't know the answer yet, doctor, but I promise you, I'll look. That is all I ask. After Krishnan left, James sat in darkness, staring at nothing. Outside, Marilyn Winter pressed against the windows. Inside, memories pressed against his mind. He thought about Ricky Chen, 25 years old, burning in an M1 Abrams while James rolled past to complete the mission. He thought about Vikram Krishnan, 25 years old, burning in an Arjun prototype while his father worked in an office hundreds of miles away, believing he was building something good. He thought about choices made in seconds that echoed across decades. At 3 in the morning, James made a decision. He picked up his phone and called Bobby. Jimmy, it's 3 a.m. Someone better be dead. Bobby, I need you to listen. Tomorrow we start testing, and we're not just going to evaluate the Arjun. We're going to try to save it. Silence on the other end. Then Bobby's voice, careful and concerned. Jimmy, the specifications say 93 deficiencies. We've got 90 days. We're not engineers. We're 3 old tankers who can barely save ourselves. I know, but Dr. Krishnan asked me if there was anything worth saving. And Bobby, I need to know the answer. I need to know if we can save something. Anything. Because if we can save this broken machine, maybe it means Ricky didn't die for nothing. Maybe it means Vikram didn't die for nothing. Maybe it means we didn't fail everyone who trusted us. Another long silence. Then Bobby sighed, the sound of a man who'd followed James Harrington into too many bad situations to start saying no now. All right, Jimmy. All right, we'll try. But you better tell Frank in the morning because I am not waking him up at 3 a.m. with this crazy idea. Thank you, brother. Yeah. See you at 0600. And Jimmy, you're buying breakfast. The next morning, James assembled the team in the testing hangar. 7 men total. James, Bobby, Frank, Dr. Krishnan, and 3 specialists from Aberdeen. He'd also called in Captain Ethan Cross, a young officer from the Pentagon assigned to monitor the evaluation and report back to General Harris. Captain Cross was 35 years old, ambitious, intelligent, and had never deployed to a combat zone. He wore his uniform with the precise creases of someone who understood regulations better than reality. He stood at the back of the group, tablet in hand, ready to document everything with digital efficiency. James stood in front of the Arjun. The tank loomed behind him, 60 tons of flawed ambition and broken dreams. Gentlemen, James began, General Harris gave me 90 days to evaluate this tank and write an honest report. But I'm changing the mission parameters. We're not just evaluating. We're going to try to fix it. Captain Cross looked up from his tablet, confused. Sir, that's not within the scope of our orders. Captain, our orders are to provide an honest assessment. I can't honestly assess potential if I don't attempt to realize it. We're going to spend 90 days not just documenting failures, but trying to overcome them. Colonel, with respect, we don't have the resources or expertise to redesign a tank. No, but we have 90 days and we have the best damn tank mechanics and operators in the United States Army. We have Dr. Krishnan, who knows this machine better than anyone. And we have something else. James paused, looking at each man in turn. We have nothing left to lose. This plant closes in 6 months. Most of us are retiring or already retired. This is our last mission. So I'm asking you, what do you want that mission to be? Do you want to spend 90 days writing an obituary? Or do you want to spend 90 days trying to save something? Bobby stepped forward. I'm in. Frank nodded. Me too. The specialists looked at each other, then one by one they agreed. Dr. Krishnan's eyes were wet, but he stood straighter. Colonel Harrington, thank you. Thank you for giving the Arjun a chance, for giving me a chance. Captain Cross stood alone in his disagreement. Colonel, I have to report this deviation from protocol to General Harris. Then report it, Captain. But while you're doing that, we're going to work. James turned to the whiteboard mounted on the hangar wall. He drew 3 columns. Critical, major, minor. 93 deficiencies, he said, writing the number at the top. We're going to sort them by priority. Critical means it can kill the crew. Major means it degrades combat effectiveness. Minor means it's inconvenient but survivable. Dr. Krishnan, I need you to help me categorize every single deficiency. Then we're going to tackle them one by one, starting with what can kill people. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. Dr. Krishnan knew every deficiency by heart. He recited them like a litany of sins, each one a failure he'd lived with, each one a reason his son might have died. By evening, they had the list categorized. 15 critical deficiencies, 28 major, 35 minor, 15 already addressed in previous modifications. Bobby looked at the board and whistled. 15 ways this tank can kill its crew. That's 14 more than I'm comfortable with. Then let's get to work, James said. That night, James sat in his temporary quarters, a small room in the Aberdeen Bachelor Officer quarters that smelled like industrial cleaner and loneliness. He opened his laptop and started a document. Day 1, he typed, the Arjun evaluation, or perhaps more accurately, the Arjun salvation. He wrote about Dr. Krishnan, about Vikram, about Ricky Chen, about 3 seconds in the desert and 28 years of questions. He wrote, we begin tomorrow with the engine, the MTU diesel that overheats after 30 minutes. If we cannot solve the overheating, nothing else matters. A tank that cannot move is not a tank. It is a monument, and we have too many monuments already. He wrote, I do not know if we can save this machine, but I know we must try, because if we cannot save the Arjun, then perhaps nothing can be saved. Not the past, not the dead, not ourselves. He wrote until midnight. Then he closed the laptop and lay in darkness, listening to the sounds of Aberdeen Proving Ground at night, generators humming, guard patrols walking their rounds. Somewhere in the distance, artillery fire from the test ranges, the percussion of controlled violence. In 90 days, he would be retired. In 90 days, he would have to figure out what a soldier does when there are no more battles to fight. But tonight he had purpose. Tonight he had a mission. Save the tank, save the legacy, save something, anything from the wreckage of good intentions and noble failures. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, they would find out if redemption was possible for broken machines and broken men. Tomorrow, 3 old soldiers and a grieving father would attempt the impossible. Not because they believed they would succeed, but because the alternative was admitting that some things could never be saved. And that was a truth none of them were ready to accept. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The snow continued to fall outside, silent, patient, covering everything in white, making the world look clean and new, even when underneath everything remained exactly as broken as before. James Harrington closed his eyes and dreamed of desert sand and burning tanks and a voice saying his name across 28 years of distance and regret. Tomorrow, he thought, tomorrow we begin. And in the darkness, that was enough. Day 1 of the evaluation began not with grand ceremony, but with the mechanical poetry of diagnosis. James Harrington stood beside the Arjun at 0600 hours, watching as Frank Delgado and 2 Aberdeen mechanics began the systematic disassembly of the engine compartment. The Maryland morning was cold enough that their breath formed clouds, small ghosts dissipating into nothing. The MTU diesel engine was a German design, licensed and manufactured in India. On paper, it should have been reliable. German engineering had a reputation forged in 2 world wars and 70 years of automotive excellence. But paper specifications meant nothing when confronted with the reality of metal and heat, and the 1,000 small compromises that turned theory into failure. Frank worked with the focused intensity of a surgeon, his hands moving with practiced precision despite the cold. He removed access panels, checked fluid levels, examined gaskets and seals. Bobby stood beside him, holding tools and offering commentary that ranged from technical observation to creative profanity. Dr. Arjun Krishnan watched from a distance, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. James wondered what it felt like to watch strangers dissect your life's work, to see every flaw exposed under harsh fluorescent lighting and the unforgiving scrutiny of men who owed you nothing but honesty. After 3 hours, Frank emerged from the engine compartment, wiping his hands on a rag that was already more grease than cloth. "Colonel, we need to talk." They gathered in the small office adjacent to the testing hangar. Frank spread out a series of photographs he'd taken with his phone, close-up shots of engine components marked with annotations. "The engine itself is fine," Frank began. "The MTU is a good motor, but everything around it is wrong. Look here." He pointed to an image showing the radiator placement. "The cooling system is undersized and positioned incorrectly. The airflow is blocked by armor plating that was added later in development. The heat has nowhere to go. It's like wrapping a running engine in a blanket and wondering why it catches fire." Bobby leaned over the photos. "Can we fix it?" "Fix it? Maybe, but not without major modifications. We'd need to reroute the cooling system, possibly relocate the radiator, improve the airflow dynamics. That's not evaluation work. That's redesign work." Captain Ethan Cross, who had been taking notes on his tablet, spoke up. "Sergeant Delgado, our mission parameters don't include modification of foreign military equipment. We're here to test and report." Frank looked at Cross with the particular expression that senior enlisted men reserve for junior officers who don't understand how things actually work. Captain, with respect, if we just test this tank as is, we'll confirm it doesn't work and go home. But if we try to fix it, we might learn something. We might understand why it fails. And that understanding is worth more than another report saying what everyone already knows. James made the decision quickly. We modify it. Frank, you have authorization to requisition whatever parts you need from Aberdeen's maintenance depot. If they give you trouble, send them to me. Cross started to protest, then stopped. He'd been outvoted by experience and rank. Instead, he made a note on his tablet, probably documenting this deviation for his report to General Harris. Dr. Krishnan stepped forward. Colonel Harrington, I can provide the original design specifications. Perhaps if we compare what was intended versus what was built, we can identify where the problems began. Do it, James said. Frank, Bobby, you're with Dr. Krishnan. I want a plan by end of day. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon. James spent the time reviewing other systems, walking around the Arjun, touching the armor, peering through the optics, sitting in the crew positions to understand sightlines and ergonomics. The tank was simultaneously impressive and disappointing. The Kanchan armor felt substantial. The welds were clean. The interior was more spacious than an M1 Abrams. But small details betrayed the troubled development. Controls that seemed like afterthoughts. Instruments clustered in ways that suggested multiple designers working without coordination. The gun breech mechanism had wear marks indicating it had been removed and reinstalled multiple times, each installation slightly different from the last. This was a tank designed by committee, modified by crisis, and built by an industrial base learning as it went. It was ambitious and flawed and human in a way that mass-produced American tanks never were. At 1700 hours, Frank, Bobby, and Dr. Krishnan emerged from their planning session. Frank carried a hand-drawn schematic that looked like it had been revised a dozen times, which it probably had. We have a plan, Frank announced. It's going to take 3 weeks and require parts from 6 different vehicles. But we can redesign the cooling system. Dr. Krishnan found the original specifications. Turns out the radiator placement was changed late in development to accommodate a different engine mount. They never recalculated the cooling efficiency. It's a cascade failure that started with one small change. 3 weeks, James repeated. That's a third of our timeline just for the engine. Yes, sir, but without a working engine, everything else is academic. James looked at the schematic, at the plans within plans, at the ambition of trying to fix in 3 weeks what 26 years hadn't solved. Then he looked at the 3 men standing before him, 2 old American soldiers and 1 Indian engineer, united by the belief that broken things could be saved. Do it, he said. Start tomorrow. That evening, James sat alone in his quarters and opened his laptop. He began typing the daily report he'd decided to keep, a personal log separate from the official documentation. Day 1, he wrote. We identified the primary failure point in the cooling system. Frank believes it's fixable. Bobby believes Frank. I believe Bobby. And Dr. Krishnan believes in second chances. Perhaps that makes us all fools, but we are old enough that foolishness and wisdom start to look similar. He paused, staring at the cursor blinking on the screen. Captain Cross filed his first report to General Harris today. I'm sure it documents my deviation from protocol. I'm sure it questions my judgment. He's probably right to do so. But Cross has never had to make a decision that costs lives. He's never had to choose between the mission and the man. He's never had to live with that choice for 28 years. We are not just fixing a tank. We are asking whether anything broken can be made whole, whether guilt can be transformed into purpose, whether the dead would forgive us for continuing to breathe. I don't know the answers, but I know we must ask the questions. James closed the laptop and lay in the narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the base at night. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the low rumble of diesel engines, the eternal background noise of military installations around the world, the sound of machines that existed to project power and protect people, machines that sometimes failed at both. He thought about his son, Michael, about the text message that had gone unanswered, about 10 years of silence and the ways families broke apart when one member chose duty over dinner, mission over moments, the abstract concept of service over the concrete reality of being present. James had sacrificed his marriage for the Army, had sacrificed his relationship with his son, had sacrificed everything except the uniform and the rank and the hollow pride of being good at a job that required you to send young men into situations where some of them wouldn't return. And for what? For Ricky Chen dying while James rolled past? For a Bronze Star that felt like an accusation? For a career that ended in an empty factory in Ohio waiting for closure notices? He reached for his phone, opened the text thread with Michael, stared at the blank message box. What do you say to a son you barely know anymore? What words bridge 10 years of choosing elsewhere over here? Someday over now, later over present. James typed, "I'm sorry." Then he deleted it, typed, "I miss you." Deleted that too, typed, "I don't know how to be your father anymore." Deleted, typed, deleted. The conversation he needed to have required more than text messages and more courage than he'd shown in any combat zone. Finally, he just wrote, "Still in Maryland, working on something that might matter. Hope Afghanistan is treating you well." He hit send before he could delete it again. 3 dots appeared immediately, showing Michael was typing. Then they disappeared, then appeared, then disappeared again. The response came 5 minutes later, just 2 words. "Stay safe." James stared at those words for a long time. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but not rejection either. A door left slightly open, a possibility deferred but not denied. He put the phone down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would begin the real work. Tomorrow they would find out if cooling systems could be redesigned and mistakes could be corrected and whether old soldiers could learn to build instead of destroy. Tomorrow, always tomorrow, the promise that kept men like him moving forward one day at a time, because looking too far ahead revealed nothing but empty years and unanswerable questions. The next 3 weeks became a blur of technical challenges and small victories. Frank and his team worked 18-hour days, cutting metal, welding new mounts, rerouting coolant lines. Dr. Krishnan proved invaluable, his encyclopedic knowledge of the Arjun systems helping them navigate the complex relationships between components. Bobby appointed himself the team's morale officer, a role he executed by bringing coffee, making jokes, and occasionally reminding everyone that they were too old for this nonsense but too stubborn to quit. Captain Cross documented everything with the enthusiasm of a man building a case, which he probably was. But even Cross began to show grudging respect for the work. He started asking technical questions instead of protocol questions, started offering suggestions instead of objections. On day 12, they hit their first major obstacle. The replacement radiator they'd sourced from an M1 Abrams wouldn't physically fit in the space they'd created. The mounting brackets were incompatible. The connections were different. What should have been a straightforward swap became a custom fabrication project. Frank stood in the engine compartment, covered in grease and frustration, and spoke the words everyone was thinking. "We don't have time for this. We don't have the equipment. We're trying to do advanced mechanical engineering with basic tools in a testing facility that was never designed for this kind of work." James looked at the radiator, at the impossible geometry of trying to fit American parts into Indian spaces, at the metaphor that was too obvious to ignore. "What do we need?" he asked. "A machine shop, a real one with precision equipment, in about a week." "Bobby, how far to the nearest civilian machine shop?" Bobby pulled out his phone, started searching. "Baltimore, 40 minutes. There's a place that does custom fabrication for automotive restoration. High-end stuff. They might be able to help. Get them on the phone." An hour later, James was sitting in his truck with Frank and Dr. Krishnan, driving north to Baltimore. The machine shop was called Precision Metalworks, located in an industrial area that had seen better decades. The owner was a man named Thomas Brennan, 65 years old, former Navy mechanic, who'd spent 40 years turning metal into money. Brennan looked at their sketches and specifications with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of mechanical problem and solved most of them. "You want me to fabricate custom mounting brackets and adapter fittings for an Indian tank cooling system," Brennan said slowly, making sure he understood correctly. "And you need it in a week." "Yes," James said. "And this is for the Army?" "It's complicated." Brennan laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling in a barrel. "Son, I've been doing complicated work for complicated people for 40 years. The question isn't, can I do it? The question is, can you pay for it? Rush jobs cost double. Custom military work costs triple." James had anticipated this. He'd made some calls, pulled some strings, found a discretionary fund that Aberdeen used for emergency procurement. It wasn't technically authorized for this purpose, but it wasn't technically prohibited either. Gray areas were where things got done. I can pay, but I need it in 5 days, not a week. Brennan considered this. Then he looked at Frank, at the grease still staining his hands, at the exhaustion evident in his posture. You're the mechanic? Yes, sir. Navy or Army? Army. 3 tours Iraq. Brennan nodded slowly. My son did 2 tours. Marines, Fallujah, Ramadi. He came home different. They all do. He looked back at James. 5 days, double rate. But you tell me what this is really about. I don't do work without knowing the story. So James told him about the Arjun, about Dr. Krishnan and his son, about trying to save something broken, about 90 days and second chances. Brennan listened without interrupting. When James finished, the old Navy man was quiet for a moment. My son died 2 years ago, Brennan said finally. Suicide. The war followed him home, and he couldn't outrun it. I spent his whole life building things, fixing things, making things work. But I couldn't fix him, couldn't save him. So yeah, I'll help you try to save your tank. Maybe it's different when it's metal instead of people. Maybe things can be fixed if you have the right tools and enough time. He held out his hand. 5 days. I'll have your parts ready. They drove back to Aberdeen in silence. Sometimes grief connected strangers faster than friendship ever could. Sometimes the only response to loss was to build something, fix something, prove that not everything broken had to stay that way. On day 18, Brennan delivered the custom parts. They were beautiful in the way that precision metalwork can be beautiful. Each piece exactly what was needed. Nothing more, nothing less. Frank installed them with the reverence of a jeweler setting precious stones. On day 20, they were ready for the first real test. The Arjun's engine, completely rebuilt with the new cooling system, sat ready to run. Everyone gathered around. Dr. Krishnan stood closest, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Bobby climbed into the driver's position. Starting engine, he announced through the intercom. The MTU diesel turned over once, twice, then caught with a roar that echoed through the hangar. Black smoke poured from the exhaust, the normal startup signature of a diesel engine coming to life. Then the smoke cleared and the engine settled into a smooth idle. Temperature readings, James asked. Captain Cross was monitoring the instrumentation they'd installed. Coolant temperature nominal, oil pressure good, all systems green. Bobby, bring it up to operating temperature, full throttle for 30 minutes. For the next half hour, the Arjun's engine ran at maximum output. The noise was deafening. The whole tank vibrated with contained power. Everyone watched the temperature gauges like they were watching a heart monitor in an intensive care unit. 20 minutes, 25, 30. Shut it down, James ordered. The engine noise faded. In the sudden silence, everyone looked at the gauges. Temperature peaked at 90 degrees Celsius, Cross reported. That's well within operating parameters. The cooling system held. Frank let out a breath he'd been holding for 30 minutes. Dr. Krishnan sat down heavily on a tool cart, his face buried in his hands. It took James a moment to realize the man was crying. Bobby climbed out of the driver's position and walked over to Krishnan. He put a hand on the engineer's shoulder, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. They'd done it. They'd fixed the unfixable. One deficiency down. 92 to go. That night, the team celebrated with pizza and beer in the hangar. It wasn't an authorized use of government facilities, but James decided that some rules existed to be ignored in favor of humanity. Dr. Krishnan, who didn't drink alcohol, raised a can of Coke. To American ingenuity and Indian stubbornness, may they never be defeated by mere mechanical reality. They drank to that. Even Captain Cross, who was slowly transforming from obstruction into contributor, allowed himself a small smile. James looked around at his team. 7 men, covered in grease and exhaustion, celebrating a cooling system like they'd won a war. In a way, they had. They'd won against probability and time constraints and the accumulated weight of previous failures. But James knew this was just the beginning. The engine ran, but could the gun shoot straight? Could the fire control system operate in heat? Could the transmission handle the weight? There were still 92 deficiencies waiting to destroy their optimism. Day 21 brought a phone call that changed everything. James was in the hangar reviewing the next set of priorities with Frank and Bobby when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code. Washington, D.C. Colonel Harrington, this is Walter Reed Medical Center calling. We have a Lieutenant Colonel Michael Harrington here. He's listed you as next of kin. The world narrowed to a pinpoint. James heard the words but couldn't process them. Michael, Walter Reed, next of kin. Those three concepts together meant only one thing. What happened? James managed to say. Your son was injured in Afghanistan. He's stable, non-life-threatening injuries. But he requested we contact you. James was already moving toward his truck. I'm in Maryland. I'll be there in 2 hours. Sir, visiting hours don't start until... I'll be there in 2 hours, James repeated and hung up. Bobby caught up with him at the truck. Jimmy, what happened? Michael's hurt. Walter Reed, I have to go. I'm driving. You're in no condition. They made the drive to Washington in 90 minutes. Bobby drove with the aggressive competence of a man who'd navigated worse things than DC traffic. James sat in the passenger seat, watching the landscape blur past, thinking about all the conversations he hadn't had, all the moments he'd missed, all the ways he'd failed at being a father while succeeding at being a soldier. Walter Reed Medical Center was a city unto itself, a massive complex where America brought its wounded warriors to be rebuilt, or at least reassembled into some functional version of their former selves. Bobby dropped James at the entrance. I'll find parking. You go. James actually ran, his 58-year-old knees screaming objection, through the main entrance to the information desk, demanding to know where his son was. The volunteer, an elderly woman who'd probably seen 1,000 desperate fathers, calmly directed him to the orthopedic ward, 3rd floor. He found Michael in a private room, his left leg elevated in a cast, his face bruised but alert. A nurse was checking vitals. She looked up when James burst through the door. Family, she asked. Father, James said, the word feeling foreign in his mouth after so many years of distance. The nurse nodded and left them alone. Michael looked at James with an expression that was complicated and unreadable. Not quite anger, not quite welcome. Something in between, the emotional territory of estranged family members forced together by crisis. Hey, Dad, Michael said finally. What happened? IED. Taliban don't appreciate Americans building schools in their territory. The truck hit the device. Driver died instantly. I was in the passenger seat. Lucky, they tell me, just a broken leg and some bruising. Could have been worse. James moved closer to the bed. He wanted to touch his son, to confirm he was real and alive, but didn't know if that was allowed anymore, if he'd forfeited that right somewhere in the decade of choosing distance over closeness. Michael, You don't have to say anything, Michael interrupted. I know, you're sorry. You wish you'd been there. You wish things were different. I know all the words, Dad. We don't need to perform the ritual. The words were a slap, accurate and painful. Why did you list me as next of kin? James asked. Your mother? Because despite everything, you're still my father. And because I thought maybe if something happened to me, you should know, should have to know, should have to feel something about it instead of being somewhere else doing something more important. James sat down in his chair beside the bed. He was 58 years old. He'd commanded tank platoons in combat. He'd made decisions that cost lives and saved lives. He'd been decorated for valor and efficiency, but sitting next to his wounded son, he felt like a child himself, lost and uncertain. You're right, James said, about all of it. I chose the Army over you, over your mother. I told myself it was duty, it was service, it was something noble. But the truth is I didn't know how to be a father. Being a soldier was easier. Following orders was easier. Having a mission was easier than having a family. Michael was quiet, looking at his father with eyes that had seen their own combat now, that understood things only war teaches. Why are you in Maryland? Michael asked finally. So James told him about the Arjun, about Dr. Krishnan and Vikram, about 90 days trying to save a broken tank, about Ricky Chen and 28 years of guilt, about the belief that maybe if they could fix one impossible thing, it meant not everything was beyond repair. Michael listened without interrupting. When James finished, his son was quiet for a long moment. You're trying to save a tank to save yourself, Michael observed. Maybe, yes, probably. That's incredibly messed up, Dad. I know, but it's also maybe the most honest thing you've ever done. James looked at his son, surprised. Michael continued, his voice softer now. My whole life, you were the perfect soldier. Never broke rules, never admitted weakness, never showed that anything affected you. But this, trying to fix something everyone says is unfixable, bringing together these random people for this impossible mission, it's human, it's flawed, it's real. I don't know if we can do it, James admitted. We fixed the cooling system, but there are 92 other problems. We have 70 days left. The math doesn't work. The math never works, Dad. That's not why you do it. You do it because not trying means admitting some things can't be saved. And if some things can't be saved, then maybe people can't be saved either. And that's a world too dark to accept. James felt something break inside him, some dam he'd built 28 years ago starting to crack. I couldn't save Ricky. I can't save those 10 years with you. I can't fix what I broke. No, Michael agreed, you can't. But maybe you can stop breaking new things. Maybe you can save something else. And maybe that counts for something. They sat in silence for a while, a father and son, separated by a decade of distance but connected by blood and war, and the understanding that comes from both. Finally, Michael spoke again. How long before you have to be back in Maryland? I should go tonight. We're behind schedule. Bullshit. You're staying here until visiting hours are over. Then you're coming back tomorrow, and you're going to tell me about this tank project, about Dr. Krishnan, about your team, not because I need to know, but because you need to tell someone. You need to stop carrying everything alone. James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. And Dad, when I get out of here in a month, I'm coming to Maryland. I've got 30 days medical leave. I'm going to help you fix this tank. Because I want to see if you're right. I want to see if broken things can be saved. You don't have to. I know. But I want to. Maybe it's a chance for both of us to fix something. Bobby appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of terrible hospital coffee. He looked at James, at Michael, at the fragile peace that had been negotiated between them. Everything okay? Bobby asked. Yeah, Michael said. Everything's okay, or at least it might be eventually. James stayed at Walter Reed until evening, talking with his son about the Arjun project, about the team, about the challenges ahead. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't apologize or forgive in any formal way. But they talked, and sometimes that was enough. When visiting hours ended, James and Bobby drove back to Aberdeen. The night was clear, stars visible, despite the light pollution from the surrounding cities. Your boy's tough, Bobby observed. Takes after his old man. He takes after his mother. She was the strong one. I was just stubborn. Stubborn saved my life more than once, Jimmy. Don't sell it short. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Bobby asked the question James had been avoiding. What are you going to do? We're 3 weeks in and we've fixed the cooling system, but we've got 92 problems left in 70 days. Even if Michael comes to help, the math doesn't work. I know. So what's the plan? James looked out at the passing darkness. We keep going, one problem at a time. We prioritize what can kill people. We fix what we can. And at the end of 90 days, we write the most honest report we can about what's possible and what isn't. And if it's not enough, then it's not enough. But at least we tried. At least we gave the Arjun and Dr. Krishnan and Vikram's memory the respect of genuine effort. That has to count for something. Bobby nodded. Eleanor used to say that, my wife. She'd say that trying matters more than the succeeding, because trying is what separates us from machines. Machines only do what they're programmed to do. Humans try impossible things for no good reason, except that we can't imagine not trying. She was a wise woman. She was. And she'd like what we're doing. She'd say we're finally learning to build instead of destroy. They arrived back at Aberdeen after midnight. The base was quiet, most buildings dark except for security lights and the eternal glow of operations centers that never slept. James went to his quarters and opened his laptop. He began typing the daily report that was becoming less a log and more a confession. Day 21, he wrote. Michael was injured in Afghanistan, broken leg, bruises, alive. We talked for the first time in years, really talked. He's coming to help when he's released. I don't know if that will make the project succeed or just give him a front row seat to failure. But he wants to try, and maybe that's what matters. We fixed the cooling system. 1 deficiency resolved, 92 remaining. The math is brutal, but math is just numbers, and we are not numbers. We are men trying to save something because the alternative is admitting that some things are beyond salvation. Tomorrow we begin work on the fire control system, the targeting computer that fails in heat above 42 degrees Celsius. It's a software problem, which means it's beyond our expertise. But Dr. Krishnan thinks he can get help from colleagues in India, international collaboration to fix an international problem. We are building something here, not just repairing a tank, building a team, building trust. Building the belief that effort matters even when success is uncertain. Ricky would laugh at me. He'd say I'm too old for this crusader nonsense. But I think he'd also understand. He died believing in something. Maybe I can honor that by believing in something too. Even if it's just a broken tank and a desperate father and the impossible idea that redemption is mechanical as much as spiritual. James closed the laptop and lay down. His body ached from the drive, from the tension, from carrying 58 years of accumulated damage. But his mind was clear in a way it hadn't been in years. Tomorrow, they would face the fire control system. Next week, the gun accuracy problem. The week after, the transmission issues. An endless parade of technical challenges that were really just metaphors for the human condition. We break, we fail, we try to fix ourselves. Sometimes we succeed, usually we don't, but the trying changes us anyway. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. James listened to its lonely sound and thought about his son, lying in a hospital bed in Washington, choosing to join this impossible project not because he believed in tanks, but because he believed maybe in second chances. That was enough. For tonight, that was more than enough. The trying was what mattered. The building instead of destroying, the hope instead of certainty. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new failures, new small victories. But tonight, James Harrington allowed himself to believe that broken things could be saved, that sons could forgive fathers, that machines and men could be rebuilt stronger than before. He closed his eyes and slept without dreaming of fire. For the first time in 28 years, he slept without hearing Ricky Chen say his name across the darkness. Progress, he thought as consciousness faded. This is what progress feels like. And in the silence of his room, in the heart of a military base dedicated to building instruments of war, an old soldier learned what it meant to build peace instead. One small repair at a time, one connection restored, one impossible thing made slightly less impossible. That was enough. It had to be. Day 60 arrived like a verdict, cold and inescapable. James Harrington stood in the Aberdeen testing hangar at 0530 hours, watching the first light of dawn filter through the high windows. The Arjun sat in the center of the space, transformed but not yet proven. 30 days remained. 33 deficiencies still unresolved. The math was brutal and honest. They would not fix everything. The question was whether they would fix enough. Michael arrived at Aberdeen on day 45, limping slightly but mobile, his legs still in a walking cast. He moved through the hangar with the careful steps of someone relearning balance, examining the Arjun with the professional eye of an armor officer who understood tanks the way poets understood words. "She's beautiful," Michael said, running his hand along the Kanchan armor plating, in a beat-up, overworked, probably going to break down again kind of way. Bobby laughed. "Just like your father." The team had grown. Word spread through military channels the way it always did, through informal networks of men who'd served together, bled together, understood each other without needing explanation. 2 more mechanics volunteered their time. A fire control systems specialist from Fort Knox drove down on weekends. An armor engineer from General Dynamics started consulting remotely, fascinated by the challenge. They worked with the intensity of men racing against time and their own mortality. Frank Delgado, 53 years old and carrying a heart that cardiologists said was overworked and underloved, pushed 18-hour days despite Bobby's protests and doctors' warnings. "I'll rest when I'm dead," Frank said, when Bobby tried to make him take a break. "That's what I'm worried about," Bobby replied. But Frank kept working because work was the only thing that made sense. His son had died in Iraq working on tanks. Now Frank was working on a tank to honor that memory, to prove that mechanical devotion meant something, that keeping machines running was a form of love. Dr. Arjun Krishnan had become more colleague than client, working alongside the Americans with the quiet determination of a man seeking redemption through precision and perseverance. He brought food his wife sent from their home in Boston, Indian dishes that the team ate gratefully, expanding their palates while shrinking the distance between cultures. On day 50, they attempted the second major test, the fire control system, the computer that aimed the gun and calculated ballistics and turned human intention into mechanical execution. Captain Cross monitored from the observation room, his tablet recording every data point, every success and failure, building the comprehensive report that would ultimately decide the Arjun's fate. Michael sat in the gunner's position, his hands on controls that were foreign, but not incomprehensible. Bobby drove. Frank managed the loader position. James commanded from the tank commander's cupola, exactly where he'd sat 29 years ago in the Iraqi desert. "Target acquisition," James ordered. "Stationary, 1,500 meters." Michael worked the controls. The turret rotated with a hydraulic whine. The gun elevated. Through the optics, a target tank appeared, an old M60 that served as practice prey. Locked, Michael reported. Fire. The 120mm rifled gun spoke with authority. The recoil rocked the Arjun. Downrange, dust erupted 3 meters to the left of the target. Miss, Michael said, frustration clear in his voice. They tried again, and again. 6 shots, 2 hits, 4 misses. The accuracy was better than the original specifications, but worse than combat requirements. An M1 Abrams crew could hit 9 out of 10 targets at this range. The Arjun managed 2 out of 6. The gun itself is sound, Frank observed later, examining the bore and breech mechanism. The problem is the fire control computer. It's compensating for factors that don't match the actual ballistics. The software is lying to itself. Dr. Krishnan nodded miserably. We used ballistic data from a different gun in early development. We updated the hardware but never fully recalibrated the software. It's a fundamental error that requires complete reprogramming. Can we do that? James asked. Not in 30 days. Not without access to the source code, which is classified by the Indian government. Not without programmers who understand both the system and the ballistics. It would take months. The room fell silent. This was the wall they'd been afraid of hitting. The deficiency that couldn't be fixed with welding and American ingenuity and sheer stubborn determination. Michael spoke up. What if we don't fix the software? What if we work around it? Everyone looked at him. The computer is giving wrong data, Michael continued, but a good gunner learns to compensate. In Afghanistan, half our targeting systems were degraded by dust and heat. We learned to aim manually, to trust experience over electronics. What if we train the crew to shoot this gun the old way, using Kentucky windage and instinct? Frank considered this. You're talking about turning a modern fire control system into a manual sighting system. That's like replacing a calculator with an abacus. But does it work? James asked. It works if the gunner is skilled enough. But it means the Arjun will never be as accurate as modern Western tanks. It means accepting limitation instead of perfection. James looked at Dr. Krishnan. Your call, doctor. This is your tank. Krishnan was quiet for a long moment, thinking about his son, about 26 years of trying to build perfection, about the cost of ambition without pragmatism. Vikram was an excellent gunner, Krishnan said finally. The best in his unit. He could hit targets others missed. Perhaps the Arjun should be a tank for excellent gunners, not a tank that makes average gunners excellent. Perhaps we accept what it is instead of mourning what it isn't. Then we train, James decided. Michael, you're our test case. If you can learn to shoot this gun accurately without trusting the computer, we can teach others. For the next 2 weeks, Michael lived in the Arjun. He fired hundreds of practice rounds, learning the peculiar personality of the 120mm rifled gun. Understanding its tendencies the way a sailor understands wind. Bobby drove patterns. Frank loaded with mechanical precision. James commanded, offering guidance that came from 35 years of tank warfare. Slowly, painfully, accuracy improved. 3 out of 6 hits became 4 out of 6, then 5. By day 70, Michael could hit 7 out of 10 targets at 1,500 meters, relying on experience and instinct more than electronic assistance. It wasn't perfect, but it was combat effective, and sometimes combat effective was enough. On day 75, disaster struck with the sudden cruelty of mechanical failure. They were conducting endurance testing, running the Arjun through sustained operations to verify all systems could function under stress. 8 hours into a planned 12-hour test, Frank Delgado collapsed in the loader position. Bobby, sitting in the driver's seat, heard the thud over the intercom. "Frank! Frank!" No response. "Shut down," James ordered. "Medical emergency." They stopped the test, pulled Frank from the tank. He was conscious but gray, sweating, clutching his chest. Michael, who'd done combat lifesaver training, checked vitals. "Pulse irregular. Possible cardiac event. We need an ambulance." The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Paramedics loaded Frank onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him away, Frank grabbed James's hand. "Colonel, don't stop. Don't stop the test. Finish it." "Frank, you need to worry about yourself." "I'm worried about myself. This is what I need. Need to know we finished. Need to know it mattered." They rushed Frank to the hospital. Tests confirmed what everyone feared. Stress-induced cardiac episode. Not a full heart attack, but a warning. His heart was tired, overworked, demanding rest that Frank's spirit refused to grant. The doctor, young and earnest, delivered the prognosis with textbook precision. Mr. Delgado needs to avoid strenuous activity. No heavy lifting, no extended physical exertion. Rest and medication for at least 6 weeks. Frank, lying in the hospital bed with monitors beeping and IV lines running, looked at the doctor with complete sincerity. "Doc, with all due respect, I'm not going to do that." The doctor blinked. "Sir, if you don't rest, the next episode could be fatal. Then I'll die doing something that matters instead of sitting on my couch watching television and waiting to die anyway." The doctor looked at James, seeking support, but James understood what the doctor couldn't. Frank Delgado's son had died in Iraq. His wife had left him years ago. He had no family, no purpose except the work. Taking away the work was taking away the only thing keeping him alive. "We'll make sure he doesn't overexert," James said, which was a lie but a necessary one. They brought Frank back to Aberdeen the next day against medical advice. He couldn't lift heavy equipment anymore. Couldn't work the loader position, but he could supervise, could diagnose problems by sound, could contribute expertise even from a chair. Bobby appointed himself Frank's guardian, watching for signs of fatigue, forcing breaks, rationing effort like it was ammunition in a firefight. "You're being annoying," Frank complained. "Good. If you die on my watch, Jimmy will never forgive me. More importantly, I'll never forgive me. So shut up and drink your water." Day 80 arrived with the weight of an ending. 10 days remained, 18 deficiencies unresolved. The team gathered for a reality check. Captain Cross, who had transformed from skeptic to believer somewhere around day 50, presented the data with clinical honesty. "We've resolved 75 deficiencies. 18 remain. Of those, 12 are minor issues that don't affect combat capability. 6 are significant but not critical. The Arjun will never match an M1 Abrams in all performance categories, but it's combat capable. It can protect its crew. It can engage targets effectively. It can operate in environments it couldn't before." "So we succeeded?" Michael asked. "We succeeded at making it better. Whether that's good enough depends on the standard we're measuring against." Dr. Krishnan spoke quietly. "The standard is whether it would have saved Vikram. That's the only standard that matters to me." The room fell silent. That was the question beneath all questions. Had they fixed enough that a 25-year-old tank commander wouldn't burn to death in a machine his father built? James made the decision. "We run one final test, full combat simulation, 12-hour endurance, live fire exercises, mobility trials, everything. We push the Arjun to failure points. If it survives, we call it success. If it fails, at least we know where it fails." "And if Frank has another episode during the test?" Bobby asked. James looked at Frank, who met his gaze with steady determination. "Then we deal with that," James said, "but we finish the test." Day 88, 2 days before the deadline. The final test began at dawn. The Arjun rolled out of the hangar with a crew that had become family. James commanding, Michael gunning, Bobby driving. A young specialist named Jake Morrison, who'd volunteered to help, took the loader position that Frank could no longer safely occupy. Frank sat in the observation vehicle, monitoring, advising, living vicariously through machinery. For 12 hours, they pushed the tank through every scenario combat could offer. High-speed runs across rough terrain, rapid-fire engagements against multiple targets, emergency stops and reversals, extreme temperature operations, running the engine until the desert heat of the simulation facility reached 45 degrees Celsius. The engine, rebuilt with the new cooling system, ran perfectly. Temperature gauges stayed green, no overheating, no failure. The gun, fired by a gunner who'd learned to aim with instinct rather than computers, hit 14 out of 18 targets across varying ranges and conditions. Not perfect, but good enough. The transmission, reinforced and rebalanced, handled the weight without catastrophic failure. Some strain, some wear, but operational. Hour 8, Hour 9, Hour 10. The Arjun continued functioning, a testament to American mechanics in Indian engineering, finding common ground in the universal language of determination. Hour 11. Michael fired the final practice round, hitting a target at 2,000 meters in conditions that would challenge any tank crew. The shot was perfect, guided by skill rather than computers, proof that excellence could overcome technological limitation. Hour 12. Bobby brought the Arjun to a stop at the designated finish point. The engine idled smoothly. All systems showed green or acceptable yellow. No critical failures, no crew casualties. James sat in the commander's cupola, physically and emotionally exhausted, and keyed the radio. "Test complete. All systems operational within acceptable parameters. Crew status green. The Arjun is combat capable. Over the radio, he heard Frank's voice, thick with emotion. Copy that, Colonel. Good work. Damn good work. They climbed out of the tank. Medical personnel checked each crew member. Technicians swarmed the Arjun, documenting the results, photographing every component, recording data that would fill the final report. Dr. Krishnan stood alone, 20 meters away, holding the wooden box that contained his son's ashes. James walked over to him. Doctor, we did it. Not perfectly, but we did it. Krishnan was crying, not bothering to hide the tears. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you for giving the Arjun a chance, for giving me a chance to understand. Understand what? That Vikram didn't die because the Arjun was flawed. He died because war is brutal and machines fail, and sometimes good people die despite everyone's best efforts. The tank has problems, yes, but it also has strengths. It can be saved, which means maybe I can be saved too. Maybe we all can. That evening, the team gathered one last time in the hangar. The Arjun sat silent, a machine transformed by 90 days of imperfect salvation. Tomorrow, James would submit the final report. Tomorrow, Dr. Krishnan would return to India. Tomorrow, the team would disperse, returning to their separate lives, carrying the memory of what they'd built together. But tonight, they were together. Bobby produced a bottle of whiskey from somewhere. Frank, ignoring doctor's orders, accepted a small glass. Michael sat next to his father, not talking much, but present in a way he hadn't been for 10 years. Captain Cross, no longer the skeptical observer, but a full member of the team, raised his glass. To impossible missions completed by improbable teams. They drank to that. Dr. Krishnan, holding orange juice instead of whiskey, spoke next. In India, we have a saying, the lotus grows in muddy water but emerges clean and beautiful. The Arjun grew from troubled development, from failure and frustration, but today it emerged as something that can serve and protect. That is beautiful. Bobby stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion and whiskey. I want to say something. Eleanor, my wife, she died last year. COVID took her, and I thought I died with her, thought there was nothing left worth doing. But these 90 days working with you lunatics trying to save this beat-up tank, it gave me something. Purpose, maybe, or just proof that old dogs can still hunt. Whatever it is, thank you. Thank you for letting me be part of something that mattered. Frank nodded, his voice rough. My son Marcus died in Iraq 14 years ago. Every day since, I've asked what it was for, what his death accomplished. And I think maybe the answer is this. We honor the dead by keeping the living alive, by fixing the machines that protect people, by refusing to accept that some things can't be saved. Marcus would have liked this project, would have liked all of you. Michael spoke next, surprising everyone, including himself. I joined the Army to understand my father. Spent 10 years trying to figure out why he chose service over family. And I think maybe I understand now. It's not that he didn't love us. It's that he didn't know how to carry both the love and the guilt, how to be present for the living when haunted by the dead. These 90 days, watching him work, watching him lead, watching him care about people and machines with equal intensity, I saw a different version of my father. Maybe the version that existed before the war took pieces of him. He looked at James. I don't forgive everything, but I understand more, and understanding is a start. James felt emotions he'd suppressed for decades rising up, threatening to overflow. He stood, glass in hand, looking at the faces of men who'd become brothers through shared purpose. I lost Ricky Chen 29 years ago in Iraq. 3 seconds. I had 3 seconds to make a decision, and I chose the mission over the man. For 29 years, I've carried that choice like a stone. But these 90 days taught me something. Ricky didn't die because I made the wrong choice. He died because war demands impossible choices, and we live with the consequences. The best we can do is honor the fallen by living with purpose, by trying to save what can be saved, by refusing to give up on people or machines or hope. He raised his glass higher, to Ricky Chen, to Vikram Krishnan, to Marcus Delgado, to Eleanor Kowalski, to everyone we've lost. We carry you forward. We remember you by refusing to stop trying. They drank in silence, each man alone with his grief, but together in purpose. The next morning, James submitted the final report to General Harris, 300 pages of technical data, analysis, and recommendations. The conclusion was carefully worded but honest. The Arjun main battle tank Mark I, as delivered, contained 93 identified deficiencies that rendered it unsuitable for modern combat operations. However, with targeted modifications addressing critical system failures, the Arjun can be transformed into a combat-capable platform suitable for Allied forces operating in environments where perfect performance is less important than reliable protection and adequate firepower. Recommendation: the Arjun should not be compared to top-tier Western tanks like the M1 Abrams or Leopard 2. Instead, it should be understood as a viable option for nations requiring domestic tank production capability with acceptable performance standards. With continued development and international cooperation, the Arjun program can succeed. The tank tested at Aberdeen Proving Ground represents what the Arjun could be with proper support rather than what it currently is. This distinction matters. Potential exists. The question is whether India chooses to realize it. Personal note: this evaluation became more than technical assessment. It became a study in redemption, in whether broken things can be saved through effort and expertise and stubborn refusal to accept failure. The answer is yes, but salvation requires acknowledging flaws, accepting help, and committing to continuous improvement. The Arjun can be saved. The question is whether we have the courage to try. General Harris called 3 hours after receiving the report. "Harrington, I've read your report, all 300 pages. It's the most technically detailed and emotionally honest assessment I've ever seen. You did good work." "Thank you, sir. I'm forwarding this to the Secretary of Defense and to the Indian Defense Ministry. Your findings will influence policy. But I need to ask you something. Was this worth it? 90 days, Frank Delgado's heart attack, your son getting injured, all of it. Was it worth it for one tank that will probably never see American service?" James thought about the question. About 90 days that felt like a lifetime. About 7 men becoming brothers. About a father and son beginning to rebuild. About Dr. Krishnan finding peace with his son's death. About Bobby finding purpose after loss. About Frank proving that dedication mattered. Yes, sir, it was worth it. Not for the tank, for what the tank represented. Second chances, redemption, the belief that effort matters even when success is uncertain. That's what I thought you'd say. For what it's worth, Harrington, I'm proud of you. You took an impossible mission and made it meaningful. That's leadership. Thank you, sir. One more thing. Lima Tank Plant. I've been fighting to keep it open. Your work here, this demonstration of what experienced tank crews can accomplish, it helped make the case. The plant stays open, reduced capacity, but open. Those 12 workers keep their jobs. James felt something release in his chest, tension he'd carried for months. That's good news, sir. It's your news, Colonel. You saved more than a tank. You saved a factory. You saved jobs. You saved people. That's a hell of a legacy to retire on. After the call, James walked to the hangar where the Arjun sat. Quiet now. Its work complete. Michael was there, standing beside the tank, running his hand along the armor the way one touches something meaningful and finite. "You leaving soon?" James asked. "Day after tomorrow, back to Afghanistan, but I'll be stateside permanently in 6 months. Reassignment to Fort Benning, Georgia. That's not far from Maryland." "No, it's not far at all." They stood in silence, father and son, separated by 10 years but connected by 90 days. "Dad, I want you to know something. What you did here, it mattered. Not just the tank, the whole thing, bringing people together, giving them purpose, showing that broken things can be fixed if enough people care enough to try. That's leadership. That's what I want to learn from you." James felt tears he couldn't stop. "I'm sorry for choosing wrong so many times, for not being there, for being a better soldier than father." Michael put his hand on James's shoulder. "You were the father you knew how to be. Now you're learning to be a different kind. That's enough. It has to be enough." They hugged, awkward at first, then genuine. 29 years of distance couldn't be erased in 90 days. But it could begin to close, and beginnings were enough. 3 months later, James Harrington stood in Arlington National Cemetery, Virginia. Not in uniform anymore. Retired now, officially civilian, though soldiers never really retired. He carried 2 boxes. One contained his own military decorations, ribbons and medals that represented 35 years of service. The other contained something Dr. Krishnan had sent him, shipped from India with a note that read simply, "Please complete what we started." James walked to a specific grave. Lieutenant Richard Chen, died February 1991, Iraq, age 25. The headstone was simple, white marble, one among thousands in the vast field of military dead. James knelt, ignoring the protest of 59-year-old knees. He placed the box of medals at the base of the headstone. Ricky, I never knew what to do with these. They felt like lies. Awards for making the right choice when it felt like murder. But I think I understand now. These aren't about me. They're about you, about everyone who didn't come home. We carry the medals. We carry the guilt. We carry the memory. And we try to live in a way that honors the sacrifice. He opened the second box. Inside was a small portion of ashes. Vikram Krishnan. Dr. Krishnan had sent them with a request. Let Vikram rest with someone who understands. Someone who died too young in service of something larger. James scattered the ashes over Ricky's grave, mixing Indian and American tank commander and tank commander, 25 and 25, separated by continents and decades but united by service and loss. Ricky, meet Vikram. He was a lot like you, believed in things, trusted people, died too young because war doesn't care about potential. Take care of each other and know that down here, we're still trying, still fighting, still refusing to give up on broken things and broken people. James stood, brushing dirt from his knees. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Bobby, Frank, Michael, Dr. Krishnan. They'd all come unannounced but not unexpected. They stood together at Ricky's grave, 7 men bound by 90 days and 1 tank, in the shared understanding that grief was carried easier when distributed among friends. Dr. Krishnan stepped forward, placing flowers on the grave. Thank you for accepting my son here, for giving him a resting place among those who understand. They're brothers now, Bobby said. All of them. Every name on every stone here. Brothers. They stood in silence for a while, each man alone with memory, but together in purpose. Finally, Frank spoke. So what now? We saved 1 tank. There are thousands more that need saving. Millions of things broken in this world. We just going to stop? James smiled. What are you suggesting, Frank? I'm suggesting we find another impossible project. Another broken thing everyone says can't be fixed. And we prove them wrong again. Bobby laughed. You had a heart attack 6 weeks ago. Doctor said you need to rest. Doctor also said I'd be dead in 5 years if I kept working. That was 3 years ago. I'm living on borrowed time anyway. Might as well spend it doing something interesting. Michael looked at his father. What do you think, Dad? One more mission? James thought about it. About retirement that felt more like ending than beginning. About skills and experience that still had value. About a team that had become family. I think Frank's right. I think we find another impossible thing, and we try to save it. When do we start? Bobby asked. Soon, but first we remember. We honor those who aren't here. Then we go forward carrying them with us. They stood together as the sun set over Arlington, casting long shadows across the graves of America's fallen. 7 men who'd learned that salvation was mechanical and spiritual, that broken things could be saved if enough people cared enough to try, that endings were just beginnings waiting to be recognized. The Arjun sat in a warehouse in India now, being studied and improved and transformed into the template for future versions. Arjun Mark II would incorporate the lessons learned, would avoid the mistakes that killed Vikram Krishnan, would protect the next generation of tank commanders. That was success, measured not in perfection, but in progress. Lima Tank Plant continued operating, reduced but alive, building and rebuilding, maintaining and modifying, serving. Michael and James talked weekly now, rebuilding relationship one conversation at a time, learning to be father and son instead of colonel and lieutenant colonel. Bobby found purpose in projects and people, honoring Eleanor's memory by continuing to live fully instead of merely surviving. Frank worked carefully, listening to his heart, rationing effort, but refusing to stop contributing because contribution gave life meaning. Dr. Krishnan returned to India and rebuilt the Arjun program with lessons learned in Maryland, transforming failure into foundation for future success. And James Harrington, 59 years old, retired soldier, stood in Arlington National Cemetery and made a promise to the dead. We'll keep going, keep trying, keep saving what can be saved, not because we always succeed, but because trying is what separates us from machines. Machines only do what they're programmed to do. Humans try impossible things for no good reason except that we can't imagine not trying. He saluted Ricky's grave, a final gesture of respect and farewell. Then he turned and walked away, surrounded by friends, heading toward whatever came next, carrying the dead forward by living with purpose and refusing to surrender to despair. The sun set, the shadows grew longer. The stones stood silent witness to sacrifice and memory. But among the graves, 7 men walked toward light, proof that endings were temporary and brotherhood was permanent and broken things could always be saved if someone cared enough to try. They reached the cemetery gates, paused, looked back one more time, then forward, always forward, into whatever came next. Together. The end.